is on the planet SDGs, so 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. And we're really excited to have you here today. And I'm going to pass it over to Jean Quinn, DW, Daughter of Wisdom, who is the Executive Director of UNANIMA International. She brings her background work as founder of Sophia Housing, which is permanent supported housing in Ireland, and is leading advocacy for family homelessness at the United Nations. Go ahead, Jean.
Thank you. I'm hoping I can get into my, I just need to get into my Word. Kieran, please, I need to access my screen.
Oh, sure. I also might add that Jean is the co-chair of the NGO Working Group to End Homelessness. And I think we have many members of the Working Group to End Homelessness here today.
I'm having problems today. Sorry, everybody. I was having problems with my computer today. But thank you very much, Kieran. And on behalf of Kieran, Molly and Eliza, our wonderful team, we want to warmly welcome all of you today to our webinar. And we are absolutely delighted with the numbers of people from around the world that are on this call this afternoon or this evening. UNANIMA International is a coalition of communities of religious women who bring their voices, concerns, and experiences as educators, health providers, social workers, and community builders to the United Nations. We are supported by our wonderful partners, the Working Group to End Homelessness, our NGOs, and members of civil society. Our present focus is on homelessness and displacement as one of several global concerns that we have and seek to address at the United Nations. Our continued and evolving focus on women, children, and girls who have been displaced have prompted us as an organization to take a lead role in homeless advocacy at the United Nations, as well as in research. UNANIMA International has recently released 2 publications highlighting the issue of family homelessness and its connections to the specific Sustainable Development Goals and human rights. The publications give space to policy and advocacy recommendations and to the voices of women, children, and girls with a lived experience globally. In Volume 1, we established combating the issue of homelessness as integral in achieving the 2030 Agenda. We were, of course, in the middle of highlighting the extreme numbers of family homelessness when struck by the pandemic. COVID-19 has dramatically affected women, children, and girls. It is harming the health, social, and material well-being of families globally. Housing conditions are still in chaos in many countries, and homelessness is on the rise globally, and forced evictions continue in many parts of the world. Climate change and environmental disasters and responses are merely aggravating the problem by further displacing poor communities, increasing their economic and social vulnerability. Additionally, housing in many cities is simply unaffordable, even for those earning a decent wage. The former rapporteur on the right to adequate housing, Leilani Farah, advocates a solution. She recommends that there needs to be a fundamental shift for states to recognize housing as a human right. She now directs the shift, the global movement, to secure the human right to housing. Another issue significant to UNANIMA International is that the SDGs cannot be achieved without the realization of child rights. Children and young adults around the globe are standing up to secure their right to good health, quality education, a clean planet, and more. the leaders of tomorrow, children, and their ability to protect the future for all depends on what we do to secure their right today. In Volume 2, we've added to our focus, analysing family homelessness and its intersections with the SDGs in the context of human rights as well as COVID-19. Staying true to our mantra, don't talk about us without us, this edition follows suit, exploring and highlighting lived experiences, practitioners, advocacy, policy recommendations, and resources through a human rights-based approach. Again, reiterating that it is integral to family homelessness. The topics of today way and support dedicated towards rural areas and their needs, including climate smart agriculture and simultaneous creation of response plans in preparation for increasing urbanization. And this recommendation fits in with SDG 14, when the needs to mitigate migration towards urban areas located on vulnerable coasts is considered. Recommendation related to SDG 12 include pursuing communal ownership of land models that ensure women's inclusion as stakeholders that will be able to be collectively review attempts for production on their land. Recommendation for SDG 13, climate action, are not simply limited to cross-sectoral investment in climate-smart urban infrastructure to create urban resilience and community, and specifically youth participation in environmental politics and climate action. And for SDG 15, recommendations must include special attention to those who are displaced from climate events, such as implementing human rights-based migration policies, which apply to whole families and allow for human response to changes in resource access that may prompt international movement. We in UNANIMA International are calling on all state and non-state actors to support local, national, and international targeted policies that support the most marginalized in our communities, especially those women and children and girls left furthest behind in our world. The urgency around these topics is clear, and we know we must act, especially within this decade of action. Our expert speakers today will help to further our understanding of family homelessness intersections with the SDGs. We know, all of us here today, we have a commitment, a passion, and compassion. And living out these values, promoting what we believe in for our sisters and brothers out of home. Our collaboration with each other is really important. Homelessness and the issues attached to it needs all of us working together. Our colleagues on this call today with the lived experience of homelessness are guiding us on this journey and informing us on their issues, their gospel stories. And for all of us, encountering others can change our point of view. And finally, let us always remember our mantra together. Don't talk about us without us. And it's back to you, Kieran.
Thank you very much, Jean. Thank you for always making sure that we use a gender lens and bring attention to women, children, and girls, which at UNANIMA International are our focus. So thank you as well for making the connections between several of the different forms of homelessness and our common perception of homelessness, making sure that climate refugees, displaced, and hidden homelessness are also our focus. So today, I will be your moderator. My name is Kieran Taylor, and I am UNANIMA International's Research Fellow. I'm delighted to share with you all this intersections of family homelessness with the various SDGs that are the focus of a lot of United Nations and grassroots work. Today, our first speaker will be Keisy, who is a youth from Vanuatu, currently studying in Australia. Some of you may recognize her from last year's Commission for Social Development, where she shared her lived experience at a UNANIMA International panel. So it's over to you, Keisy.
Hello everyone, my name is Keisy Ureleo. I want to thank UNANIMA International for inviting me to speak about my story again. I am so happy to be part of this webinar. I want to start by telling you a little bit about my home. I grew up on the west part of an island named Amba in a country called Vanuatu. Vanuatu is a nation made out of 80 individual islands located in the South Pacific Ocean. Like other countries around us, we are small in population and size, but we are very diverse. Vanuatu is a developing country, and we sometimes face economic as social issues like many developing countries. One type of issue we face very often is environmental issue because of our location and smaller economy. Climate change, disaster, and big weather events really affect us both in the village and as a whole country. They leave many people in a population vulnerable. Today, I am going to talk about my experience of becoming displaced and how different environmental disasters have affected me and my community. Many of you may have heard me tell my story of how I became displaced from the volcano in February at the Commission for Social Development. It was very hard time for me and my community when the government of Vanuatu declared a state of emergency on Ambai Island in response to the eruption of Manarafu volcano. The whole island was evacuated quickly, and due to the rushing of the evacuation and the fact we could only take that we could carry, many of us forgot lots of things we need to bring with us to make living life and going to school or getting new jobs easier. For example, ID cards, birth certificate, and school belonging, and lots more. The whole experience really turned our lives upside down. Unfortunately, the evacuation was just the start of many effects that disaster had lots of us. For many people, it also affected their health problem and highlighted how vulnerable we were to the environmental disaster and the weather. I really felt sad about the things that I forgot to bring with me, but mostly I felt sad because I had to leave my home and my island and didn't know when I would return, and if I did, what would be left. When we arrived in Sanda, the place many of us evacuated to, people who had family in the area went to stay with their family, and many houses became overcrowded. People who didn't have family or friends were settled in tents or community buildings like churches on public lands. Many people were unable to get food easily as they had little money and relied on their crops, which were left on Ambai to feed their family. We were lucky enough that many people and organizations donated our basic needs, but in time this ran out. Our school Londo was welcomed by is in distance in the day, then sleep there in the night because the school didn't have room for us. School life in Sando was very hard for us because we didn't have table to put our books on or chair to sit on. We just sat on the lawn and put the books on our laps and do our writing. When it rained, we couldn't have class. Often our tents weren't strong enough to hold the water, so the water came inside, and we had to spend the day wandering around doing nothing. During this time, sometimes I would sit by myself thinking about my house, food that we ate, clothes that we wore, and wishing I would return quickly back to my island. Every every day I felt sad because of the situation we're living in. But this was not only my experience of disaster and extreme weather affecting my education. When I was younger, I attended primary school at Dundee Primary, one of the largest schools on my island. While I was there, I had to walk every morning to school because there's no school bus for us. Every day, me and my friends from my village walked 45 minutes or 1 hour to get there. Like, although we didn't have the best resources, I loved my primary education. Like many other students in Vanuatu, extreme weather even often cause big disruption to our education. In my experience, when really big rain come, rivers or strong creeks can come across the road. This can make it very dangerous or impossible to get to school, which meant we missed out until the rain was over and it stopped flowing. During during times of cyclone, it's unsafe for us to attend school, and in rainy bad ones, they can be damaged to build our books and other resources. During cyclone time, many students in Efade, the island with our capital, Port Vila, could not go to school for a long time, and when they could do lesson outside. In times of cyclone and big storms or really bad winds, our people face many issues. Two of the biggest problems we can face is food security and access to communication. During this time, the telephone tower often got broken or ran out of fuel because maintenance people can't get to them. For the people who are connected to the network, which is most people on my island, this means we cannot communicate to people outside of the island because we had no reception. This can be really bad, especially during extreme events like cyclone, because it makes it much harder for us to receive warning or contact our families to make sure everyone is okay. Food security is also a big issue in extreme weather. Extreme weather like cyclone can ruin crops. They can spoil fruits, like in case of bananas, it can bring the whole tree down. This has a big impact because many people of us still rely on food from our garden to live off. Because this even cut off transport like planes and boats, it also means the supplies on a shop can take a long time to arrive. This is especially bad if our crops are affected. Weather patterns are changing because of climate change. This is also making life harder, mainly because the traditional way and times my grandparents and parents plant their crop is now changing. I was so fortunate to be sponsored by the Open the Door Foundation, the Tasmanian government, and also the Gegi family to come to Australia and finish my study at Elizabeth College. While the process to get here was hard, I was so happy to come to Australia, but I also felt sad for some of my friends, family who were still struggling and displaced more than 2 years on. In Australia, I continue to struggle with missing home. Since arriving in Australia, I also seen disaster here at the start of this year. We had bushfire where many people also became displaced, and of course COVID. However, the way Australia was able to respond is very different because they had many resources we didn't have in Vanuatu. During COVID, I have been unable to travel back to Vanuatu due to borders closing quickly and wanting to finish my studies in Australia. Now, after many months of avoiding it, COVID has come to Vanuatu during cyclone season. I worry for our healthcare system and Nifan people if gets out of control like other places around the world. because we didn't have many resources, and it can make our already vulnerable people and communities more exposed. Hopefully, with continuing strict regulation, it won't become a problem in the future. It has been hard to adjust to my new life in Australia and had not seen my family in so long, but I know this experience has given me many skills and opportunities that will help me in the future. While I will still feel displaced, I now have a stable home and a chance to finish my education in a good environment that doesn't have the disturbance. At the moment, I'm studying at Elizabeth College. I've been taking FED course in college, and now I'm hoping to transition into technical college in Hobart. My aim when I finish my study is to return to my country and find a job there which help people in some way, such as counselor or specialist in helping children who have been struggled with being displaced, so they can have many different opportunities like I have had. Thank you all for your listening.
Wow, thank you so much, Keisy, for not only sharing today, but for your continued partnership with UNANIMA International, which we really, really value. It's great to be able to hear the lived experience and to have a little bit more understanding of what it's like to be in your shoes. So we thank you very much for your presentation. Now I'd like to introduce Sister Amarachi Grace Ezeonu, who is the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur NGO representative at the United Nations. Sister Amarachi Grace Ezeonu is a member of the Nigeria province of the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur. She is a special education teacher by profession and has worked for many years with children and young adults with special needs. She has also worked with different women groups and parishes. Before her current role, Sister Amarachi served for 6 years as a member of the Nigerian province leadership team of the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur. Over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Kirin and Jean and all the UNANIMA team for this invitation to speak at your event. It is a pleasure. I'll talk on SDG 12, Sustainable Production and Consumption. I'll touch on Africa, but focus my sharing this morning, my presentation on the Democratic Republic of Congo. Pope Francis, in his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, reminds us that we are faced not with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but with one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental. So strategies for a solution demand an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time, protecting nature. The SDGs are also interlinked, and we cannot talk about one without touching on the other. Therefore, we will fall short, very short of achieving the SDGs if countries continue to apply the current fragmented and incoherent approach being used. The World Summit on Sustainable Development held in Johannesburg, South Africa in 2012 identified sustainable consumption and production, SDG 12, as one of the three overarching objectives of an essential requirement for sustainable development, together with poverty eradication and management of natural resources to foster economic and social development. The world's insatiable demand for natural resources such as copper, coltan, fossil fuel, timber, to mention a few, continue to drive ecological damage and fuel violent conflict displacement of families from their ancestral lands, poverty, diseases, child labor, and other forms of gross human rights abuses across Africa, and of course, other parts of the world. Most of the violent conflicts that have caused untold hardships and displacement of families, millions of families in different regions in Africa, can be traced to the struggle for the control of natural resources. The biggest driver of family homelessness in many African countries is conflict. And the struggle, and the trace of the conflict can be traced to the struggle for control of natural resources. The DRC is a country with an immense wealth of natural resources, yet a vast majority of the population still live in an endemic poverty. The Democratic Republic of Congo is the world's largest producer of coltan. Share this. My dear. Can you see my PowerPoint, Corinne?
No, but you are screen sharing. There we go. We can see it.
Okay. Coltan, which is the new gold in the last decade, has become the new gold in the last decades because of its high demand for the automotive and tech industries. That is coltan. The economy of Congo heavily depend on the mining industry, which contributes 35% of its GDP. And in a recent report by a Organization for World Peace, just in 2018 alone, 95% of the country's revenue came from the mining sector. Yet, while the middlemen and women, mostly now the Chinese nationals, in collaboration with very corrupt local officials and multinational corporations, with the complicity of many countries in the global north, continue to rake in millions of dollars, if not billions, from the mining industry in the DRC. The indigenous population wallow in abject poverty. The environment is ruined. Children and women are exposed to hazardous emission from the mines as they work, as they eke out their living. Young people are given arms to destroy even their own families and communities. Women are raped, and of course, millions of families are displaced. Though the DRC the government has made efforts to revise the 2012 mining code to address some of the challenges that face the mining sector, including child labor, displacement, reward for displacement of families to make way for mining. These laws are still being flouted on the ground, of course. Poverty drives child labor, and many mine owners exploit cheap labor, exploit children as cheap labor. A father once shared, who is a carpenter in one of the mining villages, he said he earns an equivalent of $5 on very good days, but those good days are not many. So often he's left with nothing. With this kind of situation, how do you want me to stop my children from going to the mines when I, as a parent, cannot even provide for their basic needs? From the data published by the Internally Displaced Monitoring Center, the DRC just this year, first half of this year alone, recorded 1.4 million displacements of families associated with violent conflict, and about 350 associated with natural disaster. Just the first half of the year, 2020. And the UN Commission for Refugees estimates 5.5 million displaced, internally displaced people in the DRC, making the country the world's largest displaced population, and in the world and in Africa, of course, the largest, a place with the largest population of displaced people. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs have often described the situation in the DRC as the worst humanitarian crisis, and all can be traced to the greed and drive for natural resources. Often we don't hear about this on the news. The protracted conflicts between opposing militia groups or between the government troop and the militia group have caused many families to flee their homes. They live in makeshift camps, exposed and vulnerable to further abuses, especially the women and children. The issue is not about stopping mining in the DRC, because we know that cannot happen, at least in our own lifetime. But how can this be done sustainably to minimize damage to the environment and protect the rights of the indigenous people, children, especially children and women, to ensure that the revenue derived from this mining sector is used to improve the economic and social well-being of the population? Here, wealthy multinational corporations such as Apple, Tesla, Google, Microsoft, who are the beneficiaries? They are the ones that rake in billions, live on the blood of the people of Congo. They have a moral responsibility to ensure no child labor or human rights abuses in their supply chains. They have the technical and financial resources to do this. If Amnesty International and other human rights organizations with their limited resources can do this, so can these multi-billion corporations. It is also incumbent on countries in the global north, North America, Europe. China is a big player now, South Korea, where these multinational corporations are located, to pass legislations making it possible to investigate and prosecute companies that fail to meet the required human rights standards in their supply chains. However, the ultimate responsibility to safeguard the lives and human rights of the Congolese people lies primarily with the government of the DRC. The government needs to demonstrate the political will to tackle the lingering problems associated with mining in the country. It needs to invest in economic and social programs to lift many families from centuries of endemic poverty. But the biggest obstacle will be dealing with corruption, both within the country and outside the country. Sister Dorothy Stan, one of our sisters who lived most of her adult life in the Amazon basin in Brazil, and was murdered for her outspokenness against the destruction of the environment and displacement of many indigenous communities, once said, after she received the threat from these big time farmers and loggers to leave the area, she insisted, "I don't want to flee, nor do I want to abandon the battle of these farmers who live without any protection in the forest. They have the sacrosanct right to aspire to a better life. on land where they can live and work with dignity while respecting the environment. We can say that for the people of the DRC and South Sudan, Nigeria, I mean, almost every country in the on the continent, and of course, other parts of the world. Thanks to the decades of dedicated service of numerous religious congregations of women and men, and other faith-based organizations, local and international NGOs, and individuals like the recent Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Denis Mukwege, who continue to provide quality health care, education, and other social services to the people of DRC. My own congregation, Sisters of Notre de Namur, has been in the DRC for over a century, providing quality education to the children, health care, and accompanying women in their struggle. Here are the United Nations, the NGO Mining Working Group, a coalition of NGOs accredited to the United Nations, advocate for and through the United Nations for human and environmental rights related to extractive industries. And we have the DRC as one of our focus regions for the year 2020 and 21. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you so much for educating us specifically on the DRC and for making so many connections between how drivers of conflict create family homelessness. We see conflict as a very systemic issue around the world, and these connections you made to child labor, poverty, economic dependence on various industries, and the need for protections for vulnerable groups are significant. So thank you very much. We'll continue now with our next panelist, Julieta Perucca. She's a law graduate from the University of Maastricht with a degree in international and European law and a political science degree from the University of Ottawa. Julieta is an experienced researcher and human rights activist. She has been working alongside Leilani Farah for the last 4 years, conducting missions, assisting with thematic and country reports, as well as helping to launch The Shift. She has been expertly trained in the area of the right to housing, and as deputy director, she facilitates engagement with the Shift network. Julieta leads the work on housing and climate change for The Shift. Thank you so much for being here today, and over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to participate in this event. As Kieran said, my name is Julieta Perucca, and I am the Deputy Director of The Shift, which is a global human rights organization working to secure the right to housing. And I really appreciate Jean's words at the beginning of this conversation. And it's been such a pleasure with The Shift to partner with UNANIMA and with the UN Working Group to End Homelessness. So I have the privilege today to just provide kind of an overview of how homelessness intersects with climate change and how it particularly affects families and women and children. So I'm just going to dive in. So we know that the world is at a tipping point now more than ever. There are more than 150 million people living in homelessness during a global pandemic without a place to stay home, physical distance, or practice safe hygiene. And despite the fact that housing is now clearly the frontline defense against the virus, we also know that homelessness likely increased during the pandemic as mass evictions continue to take place the world over. Families, women, and children are finding themselves in increasingly crowded shelters, encampments, or informal settlements. The pandemic has amplified the homelessness crisis, and it has exposed it as a dire human rights crisis, demonstrating that access to home is a matter of life and death. Parallel to this human rights crisis, we also know that we are facing an environmental crisis, causing extreme weather and climate change disasters. Despite the known and universally accepted urgency that we face, we have failed as an international community to come together and hold each other accountable for meeting our carbon emission targets set in the Paris Agreement, or even the targets set in SDG 13 on climate action. While the pandemic has lowered global carbon emissions by 6%, a Guardian analysis of national COVID economic recovery packages, which should really highlight climate action, show that climate change mitigation measures have been almost entirely left out of these packages. The International Energy Agency states that countries are planning emission cuts that amount to only 15% of the reductions needed to fulfill the Paris Agreement. This means that we can expect emissions to come roaring back to unprecedented levels after the pandemic, all in the name of economic recovery and all undermining the targets of SDG 13. Let me give you an illustrative example from my home country of where these two crises merge and where they rank in priority for government. Canada has announced a $300 billion recovery package that includes money for massive highway expansion, infrastructure development, as well as tax reliefs for fossil fuel companies. Of these $300 billion, only $6 billion has been announced for green initiatives like home insulation, clean energy, and green transport. And even more despairingly, only $1 billion has been announced to create 3,000 units for the over 200,000 people that are currently experiencing homelessness in the country. These budgetary priorities are not unique to Canada, despite the fact that these are quite possibly the two most pressing crises that we are dealing with today. Only 4 countries, France, Germany, UK, and Spain, have introduced recovery packages that will produce a net environmental benefit. And as far as I know, in my research, only the EU has proposed addressing homelessness in their economic recovery package. So aside from underwhelming commitments from governments, what are other intersection points between climate change and homelessness? As we've already heard, most urgently, we know that those living in homelessness, and in particular women and children, are the most vulnerable to climate change. Studies have shown that the chronic health conditions that are common to populations experiencing homelessness also make them more vulnerable to conditions like heat stroke, dehydration, and respiratory illnesses. Those living in homelessness are also, of course, more prone to experience extreme climate like heat or cold without the necessary access to services, food, or healthcare. A study from the Journal of Urban Health showed that aside from the physical risks faced by those sleeping rough, pre-existing psychiatric illness has been shown to triple the risk of death from extreme heat. And studies show that deterioration of health due to climate change disproportionately affects women and girls in all domains, including an increase in mortality rates, violence, HIV infections, and then of course, with climate change disasters comes diminished access to education, which then results in even poorer long-term health outcomes. So aside from climate change affecting people living in homelessness, as we have already heard from 2 great examples of Vanuatu and Congo, it is also one of the biggest drivers of homelessness. Climate-fueled disasters have driven an average of 20 million people per year from their homes in the last decade alone, putting the right to housing at risk of hundreds of millions of people. Those lacking access to resilient, secure, affordable housing are most adversely affected, as they often live in areas that are vulnerable to floods, hurricanes, cyclones, storm surges, of which I think we're going to hear soon from one of our speakers from the Philippines. We see this as a particularly problematic issue in huge urban centers like Lagos, Manila, Jakarta, as well as hyper-financialized centers like New York, London, and Melbourne, but also Lagos, Jakarta, and Manila. In Lagos, for example, flooding in the last decade has resulted in homelessness, damage to housing and infrastructure, and a lack of basic services. it is one of the biggest contributing factors to the fact that 70% of the urban population live below the poverty line. In Bay County, Florida, 1 in 10 residents experienced homelessness after Hurricane Michael hit in 2017. The research showed that because of the national shortage of affordable housing for low-income communities, minority groups, persons with disabilities, and single-parent households meant that these groups were more likely to stay in situations of homelessness for longer periods of time after the disasters hit. And of course, women and children are again the most vulnerable. The World Health Organization noted that psychological stress caused by climate change disasters is more likely to increase partner violence, particularly if families are left in homelessness or transitional housing. Women in these situations also become more isolated, more disconnected from their families and their protective systems. The longer that families live in shelters or emergency housing, the more likely that this violence is going to occur. Let me now move to my third and final point, highlighting the intersection of homelessness and climate change. Securing the right to housing for the 150 million people living in homelessness, among the 1.8 billion people living in grossly inadequate housing, will depend on the world's success in combating climate change. The climate crisis and the housing and homelessness crisis converge in devastating ways, with studies indicating that 39% of global energy-related emissions are caused by the building and construction sector. If governments are to meet their SDG obligations under Goal 11, and they are going to secure the right to adequate housing for all by eliminating homelessness and upgrading informal settlements, they will need to shift their approach to how housing is constructed, developed, and maintained. This requires a new approach to housing, one that is not rooted in the commodification of housing and moves away from using conventional building materials such as cement and steel. The use of existing and now more than ever empty buildings and the conversion of these buildings should be considered always as priority over demolition and new construction. All of this to say that we need an innovative response. We will not build our way out of the housing and homelessness crisis, and we will never prevent homelessness without combating climate change. If we're to be successful, our approach to combating climate change and securing the right to housing for all must be based in human rights, and it must provide coherency in the way governments tackle these two most pressing issues of our generation. So I think I'm going to leave it there, and I really look forward to answering any more questions during the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Julieta, for your presentation. UNANIMA International really value your partnership as well, and your focus and emphasis of the human rights necessity in analysis and in innovation and solutions is essential. And the shift, and Leilani, when she was Special Rapporteur with US Aid, Senior Aid, really did a lot to pave the way for the human rights-based approach being used. So thank you so much for that, as well as talking about the COVID-19 context, and I think making us feel a little bit more of the urgency surrounding these issues. So I'd like to introduce the next panelist, who is Marvie Misolas. One second here. So Sister Marvie Misolas is a Filipina Maryknoll sister who is the current non-governmental representative of the Maryknoll Sisters, part of the Maryknoll Office for Global Concerns at the United Nations. She is currently based in Ossining, New York. Marvie was missioned in Taiwan for 13 years, accompanying women suffering homelessness, where she helped establish the Good Samaritan Women's Center in Taichung, Taiwan. She was then sent to study the field of environment, peace, and security at the United Nations mandated University for Peace in Costa Rica, 2012 to 2013, specializing in climate change and security. On her return to the Philippines in 2014, she taught a graduate course on environmental science and ethics, climate change science, and disaster risk reduction management studies. She also worked with climate vulnerable populations of urban poor, farmers, and fisher folks, and collaborated with other environmental networks, as well as collaborated with the government of the Philippines. From 2014 to 2016, as part of her networking collaboration with Green Convergence, a national network of green NGOs, she coordinated a national survey and audit on 13 environmental laws in the Philippines and its implementation with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and the results of which she presented at the first Philippine Environment Summit in 2016. She returned to the US in 2017 to represent the sisters at the UN. Thank you so much, Marvie, for being here, and go ahead.
So welcome and thank you, UNANIMA, for inviting me to this panel. I have heard a lot of what I'm going to share with you. I have heard from many of the speakers, but I think I will still go with what my presentation is, just to amplify what have been said. Right now, as we talk, I think many of the residents, families in Maryknoll, my town, is submerged in water because of the typhoon Vamco or Ulysses in the Philippines. So I will be sharing my screen for most of my presentation. Sorry. But I think it will help us more to situate where I am coming from in terms of talking about SDG 14 and 15. So I will be sharing my screen now. And so just let me know if you can hear me or not, okay? All right, so let me just pull out the whole screen here.
Great.
Okay, so you can hear me, okay? So I don't know how to do this in 8 minutes, but I will try. I'd like to approach this presentation of SDGs 14 and 15 in terms of healthy planet equals healthy people. On a positive approach, but we're going to deal with what is happening on the ground. We have the 17 goals, and as Grace had mentioned, they're all interconnected and interrelated. So I will be talking on 14 and 15. These are the planet goal, SDG goals. And in my presentation, I will try to put together all these 5 elements of the SDGs: people, planet, peace, partnership, and prosperity. SDG 14, life below water, the indicator that I chose to talk here is 14.21, protect and restore ecosystems. And this is really based on how in my country, Philippines, are trying to incorporate in terms of resilience and resilience to climate change. And also because Philippines is an archipelago, we have vast coastline and people are living there. This is about protection of marine areas. So just want to give us a more like a picture of the land and water area of the Philippines. So the land area is about 301,000 kilometers square, and the total marine water area is 2.2 million kilometers square. And we're talking about a coastline of 36,000 kilometer coastline. if we talk about Philippines situation, most of the Philippines are in coastal areas, and many of the largest cities in the Philippines are in the coastal areas, especially Manila. And so we now go to SDG Life on Land. And when we're talking about the Philippines, we're talking about the protection and restoration of terrestrial ecosystems. So we know that human life depends on the earth and the life on lands and the oceans for not only sustenance but life itself. So we are talking about the ecosystems services that is provided by life on land and life or the oceans or life below water. So when we're talking about these two, we will be talking about the protection, but also in the Philippines that we are situated in a coastal area. So according to assessment report, fifth assessment report of IPCC, we know that the human influence of the climate change system is clear, and by the end, this is the target that is we're taking right now, that there could be more than 4 degrees Celsius above from the current temperature. So we know that change would be likely lead to severe and widespread and irreversible impacts on the society. So Philippines is considered third among the most vulnerable nation. So I just would like to go into what happened the last I think 2 weeks to be exact. So Typhoon Goni, this is the OCHA, this is from OCHA. So we are talking about category 4 this time. So Typhoon Goni had hit Catanduanes and Camarines Sur, including Bicol region. And this is with the maximum wind of 209, 251 kilometers per hour. So it's pounding the whole region in that. So with regards to OCHA snapshot here of what happened, the aftermath of the typhoon, we are looking at how the UN have looked into the affected population, and especially in terms of like how the household, how vulnerable they are, the housing units here that they looked into, because a lot of I think aftermath of the typhoon talks about the destruction of many family homes. And of course, if we sum that up to math, this is homelessness, family homelessness. So this is just to let you see the vastness of the situation. Some of my friends have sent me some actual pictures that they have gone into when they went. This is taken on November 6th in Bicol region, and you can see that even the greens, the plants are all almost destroyed. So again, I don't want to say again that women and children and elderly are very much more vulnerable. So we know that the Philippine per capita income is only about 10,000. This is, I think, about like 200, less than $200 according to 2017 data. And the inequalities is very largely. So in terms of the impact of typhoon and extreme climate impact, I would like to point out here that Bicol region, where, you know, the maps that I have shared with you earlier, is the highest in population living below poverty threshold. And why is that? And of course, many people are not really homeless. You know, they have natural housing. They live as, you know, as farmers and fishers. However, Bicol region is in the path of the Pacific storm. So anything, you know, we have about 20 plus typhoon every year, and this region is always being funneled by this. So if we have this situation since, you know, how many years, it is always equal to poverty, because all the money that is given to development would always go into reconstruction. We are reconstructing all the time. So I hear a lot of reports about you know, that, you know, poverty. I think this is we have to look into the situation of why people, you know, geographically under geopolitical situation, in order to understand the poverty and homelessness of so many people in the Philippines. So here in the reports, again, this is just one province. So we are looking into you know, towns that are 80 to 90% damaged houses, and most of these are natural. And so just this yesterday and today, we are looking into another super typhoon. It's a category 4 typhoon again that is funneling. And so just to go through this, this was last night, and it's just horrifying to see. This is my own neighborhood in Maryknoll, and you see, you know, their housing are not made with simply natural materials. They're concretes, but it's the flooding that are affecting. So IPCC assessment report 5 is saying that the scale of change required will pose significant technological, economic, social, and institutional challenges. How will this go into adaptation for societies? And we're talking about SDG 14 and 15, ocean and life on Earth. So when we were talking about this, about the vulnerability, a lot of talks is on resilience. Well, I think people in the Philippines have lived in their own resilience and developed their resilience in terms of this. It's more over and over happening in terms of typhoon and all kinds of calamities. So I'm not going to go into this anymore, but I just would like to go through what the framework of national climate change in the Philippines. And this has the enhancement of adaptive capacity for resilience and the climate smart development. So among this is that we have the National Climate Action Plan that envisions the climate risk resilience Philippines and productive ecosystems. So we have the Climate Change Act of 2009. And again, you know, you can see that the word here is adaptive capacities and resilience. It's because of the reality, you know, where we are. And so, as I said, you know, Philippines is third on the rank of the most climate disaster affected countries. But, you know, in terms of Philippine disasters, we are talking about the highest right now that we are experiencing is tropical cyclone, and this is a data from 1901 to 2014. So, and the last top 10 Philippine disasters here, and this is, I think, 2016 data, happened in the last 2 decades. But we are talking now of 2013, and now we have 2020. So this is not decades that we are talking, and this is the new normal, that we have all these mega typhoons funneling Philippines. We are talking in terms of SDG 14 and 15. We are talking about the ecotown approach in terms of resilience. So it's the connection between the mountains and the oceans that is that could really help our our people in terms of resiliency using the ecosystem approach. So this is not just we have a bigger. I borrowed this, but because I think in terms of resilience, we are faced with compounded. You know, there's a bigger wave here in terms of climate change. So again, you know, building resilience is not about poverty reduction for the Philippines. It is to preserve the ecosystems services that requires human life, and also using this as a stabilizing, provisioning the ecosystem services. I would like to mention here about the indigenous traditions knowledge. Most of the indigenous lived on forest area, and so we must look into this. We talk about here of land as an ancestral domain, and you will see later in the projects that we have gone through that indigenous people play, as well as women, important. I think one area that we have not often talked about, I think, is the Filipino faith. Philippines is largely Catholic country, and a lot of people, I think, gain strength because of their faith, and we are able to go into. So let's talk about the community-based adaptation, which means looking at the SDG 14 and 15 in terms of adaptation strategy. This picture is one of the Upper Maryknoll communities that we are working with in terms of national greening program, and this was in 2016. These people lived on the forests, and they are part of the Maryknoll Watershed Initiative, which means greening this whole area to improve the ecosystem. And so in this area, part of the people that are being asked to plant in the National Greening Program are indigenous people. These are the Dinagats, and many of these people lived in the mountains. Another project that we have is working, again, this is also the National Greening Program, is the seedlings production with families to help green the Philippines. This is in Eastern Samar. Eastern Samar is also part of the places where we have worked in terms of disaster risk reduction management, training the families in terms of increasing the mangrove forest planting, and training environmental leadership. As our focus here is to also work with women, put them front and center in terms of climate change adaptation. And of course, they are this is part of the farming groups. In Albay, we have the protected marine sanctuary, where they have the mangroves restoration project. I think before this whole area does not have mangroves, but they started to project during up the project before. I heard Grace talked about the conflict, and yes, we also have conflict and development down in Mindanao, and this is the area where we have the returnees. They are the Muslim rebels who have returned, and the community is working on development in terms of agriculture. This is the community-based disaster risk reduction training in one of, yes.
Wrap it up soon.
Okay, so I just want to complete this in terms of urban poor. So these are examples of this work. So in conclusion, I just want to point out that people are not lacking in resilience and preparation. And so we must go into the polluters pay principle and go to the loss and damage that vulnerable nations are suffering. So we must, I think, invoke the loss and damage mechanism and the Paris Agreement. We must put it on top of the climate agenda. So developed nations also must deliver to the cutting their emissions to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees. And developed nations must deliver to the funding promises made in climate change Paris Agreement. Okay, so I think I'd like to end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marvie, for the wonderful presentation. It's great for us to have a better understanding of what resilience is and how governments and other actors can help contribute and build up that resilience for people who are vulnerable to homelessness, housing insecurity, and displacement. Thank you so much for connecting also that SDG 14 is intimately tied to SDG 15. At this time, I'm going to briefly share my screen and show you just that a lot of these presentations and intersections of family homelessness and the various Planet SDGs are actually also laid out in our publications from UNANIMA International. Here we have the connections between SDG 12 and in all of these different sections of our SDG publications, we have a variety of experts, including the lived experience testimonies, an expert from someone who's working either on the ground or professionally on this topic, and also a variety of quotes and recommendations. So I won't go through it too much since we're short on time, but here we have SDG 13, various testimonies, SDG 14, 15, and I'd like to invite everyone to register for our next webinar because as we have mentioned, this is part of a webinar series. So the next one will be next Friday, November 20th, and it's on family homelessness and the people SDGs. As the last speaker at today's event, we want to invite Francesca on behalf of UN Habitat to make a statement. Previously, we partnered with UN Habitat, and Chris Williams, who's the director of the New York office, offered an analysis for SDG 11 in our first volume. So please go ahead, Francesca.
Hello, everybody. Such a joy to join this event. I really brings the greetings from Chris. As you say, already collaborated with you, and he really wanted to be part of these webinars. But we are in the middle of a very intense negotiation in New York and member states are requesting a lot of last minute important information, and so it cannot be here with you all, but is here with his heart because it's really committed to this partnership. So I want to first of all thanks UNANIMA for organizing this series of webinar on family homelessness and SDGs, and for inviting UN Habitat to participate and to see the perspective of housing SDG 11. Housing is a vector for socioeconomic inclusion and development. Access to housing is a precondition for access to employment, education, health, and social services. A well-functioning housing market can be a vector for economic development, a potential source of job creation. The future of sustainable urbanization, therefore, depends on how policymakers position housing as a priority in the public debate around sustainable urban development. Housing is at the heart of UN Habitat mandate. Since our foundation, we have worked to promote right to adequate housing for all and assist member states in doing so. Everybody should live somewhere in peace, security, and dignity. This is what Habitat stands for. Housing issues are high in the global development agendas, both in the SDGs through its target 11.1 to provide access for all to adequate, safe, and affordable housing by 2030, and of course, in the new urban agenda, have set an unprecedented recognition of how adequate housing can contribute to sustainable development and people's well-being, and of course, family well-being. UN Habitat promotes the housing at the center approach. UN Habitat provides guiding principles for policies and action of national and local government to achieve transformation on the ground by positioning housing at the center of social welfare and of sustainable urban and development solutions. To this scope, realizing SDG 11 and its target means understanding that housing is not just a roof. Housing is first and foremost a fundamental human right, the fulfillment of which requires a concerted, coordinated, and multidisciplinary effort from all stakeholders. When developing, formulating, and implementing our tools, policies, and programs, we should put people at the center, family at the center of our thinking and action. In doing so, our special attention should be to the housing need of the poorest and most vulnerable, those who live on the street, in the temporary shelter, and housing with inadequate conditions, including women, youth, older persons, and migrants. Goal 11 is closely linked to the issues of family homelessness. Target 11.1 specifically stated by 2030 ensure access for all to adequate, safe, and affordable housing and basic services and upgrade slums. And he extracts the most direct link to homelessness in the SDGs. Target 11.1, along with other United Nations documents, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, specifically give reference to the right to housing as a major challenge to the achievement of Goal 11. For this reason, it is integral that family homelessness is addressed in order for Goal 11 and the 2030 Agenda to be achieved. Housing plays a fundamental role in youth transition to adulthood and is one of the main contemporary challenges facing youth people across the world. Discrimination against women and girls takes many forms, but one of the most pressing is the inheritance of land rights. Women must have access to use and of control over land and other productive resources such as housing to ensure their right to equality and to adequate standard of living. Housing condition and accessibility for young people have substantially worsened in the past 2 decades due to the changes in demographics, the labor market, the housing system, or the welfare regimes. Families, especially youth, are severely cost burden with housing costs and have much less to spend on other necessities, such as food, health, transportation, and clothing. This leads to an increasing use prolonged parental co-residence, which has negative impact on the marriage rate and fertility, leading to a greater dependency of family resources and increased youth marginalization. The rising housing costs and the progressive deteriorating of housing affordability constitute a worrying trend international and a crucial policy challenge for the future. Housing affordability for first-time buyers, therefore, is a core issue that housing policies need to address globally. The first challenge is to ensure all young people have an equal opportunity to live in the family home and live independently. And the second is to improve sustainability and availability of housing for young people. Innovative policy solutions for youth should point towards an improved rented sector, a further provision of shared housing. A new form of shared living and co-housing are emerging as a response to affordability issue. A well-functioning housing sector and access to adequate housing can indeed make a real difference in the lives of our people and the prosperity of our countries and cities. We recently launched the World Cities Report 2020. The report shows that the intrinsic value of sustainable urbanization can and should be harnessed for the well-being of all. The reports provide evidence and policies analysis of the value of urbanization from an economic, social, and environmental perspective. The World Cities Report 2020 convincingly affirmed that well-planned, managed, and financed cities and towns create value that can be harnessed to build a resilient city that can bounce back from the devastating impact of pandemics, improve the quality of life of residents, and can be leveraged in the fight against poverty, inequality, unemployment, climate change, and other pressing global challenges. Sustainable urbanization has a key role to play in a decade for action for accelerating sustainable solutions towards eradicating poverty, reducing inequality, addressing climate change, and enhancing gender equality. COVID-19 provides opportunity for cities to build back better in the long term for more inclusive cities and build up resilience against future pandemics. When designed with climate adaptation, mitigation, and resiliency, cities can create community that enhance environment values like cleaner air, more compact, integrated, and walkable cities. Any urbanization process that does not actively address institutionalized obstacles to full representation, recognition, and distribution is inequitable and therefore undermines the value of urbanization. Realizing the social value of sustainable urbanization is not a natural consequence of economic growth, which does not automatically reduce poverty and inequality. Current international debates are characterized by urban optimism, as sustainable urbanization is recognized as a transformative force to harness environmental value. The implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the new Urban Agenda, the Paris Agreement, and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction are embedded in this urban optimism. Harnessing the environment value of urbanization requires a more participatory approach to planning. An intersectional approach is thus key to understanding the needs and concerns of different groups. Urban greening initiatives enhance the environmental value of urbanization, but adequate measures are needed to ensure that they do not exacerbate inequality and social vulnerabilities. The environmental value of sustainable urbanization cannot be realized without prioritizing the needs of the disadvantaged groups. The opportunities offered by cities lend a social value to urbanization. When cities are well planned and managed, they can lift families out of poverty, liberate women from gender-based discrimination, point to bright future for children and youth, offer comfort and support to older persons in their golden years, and welcome migrants looking for a better future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesca, for speaking today and for helping us continue our partnership with UN Habitat. It was great to hear about how cities and communities can more intentionally help all people, vulnerable groups included, including women, children, and girls, and people living in informal settlements. We were really happy to get this perspective. So as we're running out of time, I'd like to ask the panelists a question that kind of summarizes the various questions out there. What is something you would like to see your governments do in response to the urgency of the different climate issues and growing family homelessness around the world? And if you don't mind, we'll start with you, Grace.
To unmute myself. As I shared in my presentation, I think the government need to take, the addressing the SDGs seriously. Is the political will. It's one thing to say something different in the UN, and different thing happened on the ground. It's alleviating poverty, investing in the people. My focus was on SDG 12, sustainable consumption and production. How does the government make what belongs to the people improve the lives of the people? So dealing with these basic issues, providing housing, education, and eradicating abuses or forms of abuses, especially to do with women and children.
Thank you, Grace. Marvie, would you like to answer briefly?
Sure. I think for me, I go back again to my concept that healthy planet is equals to healthy people. So it's the holistic approach to the ecosystems that are interacting with climate. So I think for me, I still go back to the Paris Agreement and even the Kyoto Protocol, that Annex II countries must really call the developed nations to really deliver on the loss and damages, because that is where we can get funds to even address, the improving the ecosystems of SDG 14 and 15. We need, the countries alone is not able to cope up with, one after the another disasters. So I think we are doing, for me, what I've seen on the ground is that people and governments are trying to do, what they can to cope, to have resilience. But it's not enough. This is a new normal. This is not our own making. And I think developed countries must deliver, to their promise.
Thank you so much. Keisy, would you like to have a final say today?
I think the government needs to listen to all the people like farmers and youth, not only the educated people in the country. That's all.
Thank you so much. It's clear that we need a holistic approach to end homelessness. We need an awareness of the various forms of homelessness and the diversity in that. We need to be aware of the traumas that homelessness can cause, not only for the individual, but for families, communities, and our global community. Knowledge of these intersections between family homelessness and the various United Nations SDGs, in addition to other diplomatic processes and agendas, is essential in order for us to move forward and effectively prevent and address the increasing displacement, housing insecurity, and homelessness that we are seeing in our world. UNANIMA International are very much committed to continue researching and highlighting the voices of women, children, and girls who are experiencing and living this reality. So we thank you so much for attending today. We thank you to our amazing speakers and to everyone who's doing work in this field. And we do invite you to register for our next webinar, which, as I said, will be on November 20th at 9 a.m. In Eastern Time. And thank you so much again for being here, and good luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you.